Raft had taken an extended leave of absence after Freddie Crook's departure. For several long months, he lost himself in the sort of desultory work that was usually the province of his friend, the resurrection man Jeremy Hoare. He hired himself out as a consulting detective, mostly occupied with finding old ladies' parasols and hatpins. Raft had never been so bored in his life. "Good to see you, Doyle." Raft shook his hand with something like relief. "Where's everyone got to? Don't tell me the Ripper's loose again." "Och, thereabout. Sir George is having a meeting with him in the sergeant's room. I suppose you've heard?" Raft nodded. "Miriam Dewberry. Damn shame." It was his habit to read the newspapers as soon as he got up in the morning, but it didn't make the recent news any less shocking. Dewberry was about as high up as you could get in this country. From a very old family with very old money. Dewberry was a peer and a member of Parliament. To think that someone had the insolence to kidnap his daughter was something else entirely. "Do you think Sir George would mind if I—" "You know you'd be welcome to sit in," Doyle said. "Sir George would appreciate your opinion." He waved the sheaf of paper. "Afraid I've got to get back. You take care of yourself, sir." He stepped into the lift Raft had just vacated and sank slowly and inexorably out of sight, like a whale settling to the depths of the sea. Raft navigated his way to the sergeant's room and cracked open the door. At once several heads turned in his direction. He recognized the fiery pate of Fred Abernathy, still as fat as ever, and the young constable called Chumley, and, of course, Sir George Endicott. The latter waved him in. "Raft, come in, have a seat. We were just discussing the Dewberry case." The room was stuffed to capacity with men, some leaning against the far wall, others pressed into doorways. The radiator in the corner hissed and clanked, trying desperately to keep the old January cold at bay. The room smelled of wet wool, leather, and sweat. Police Commissioner Sir George Endicott, fiery-haired and diminutive, was held in court in the centre of the room. Displayed on a board behind him were various accoutrements pertaining to the case, a scrap of handkerchief, some dried flowers, and what Raft assumed was a lock of Miriam Dewberry's dark hair. It reminded him uncomfortably of the Ripper case, with its diverse assortment of hair and buttons and petticoat lace. Please God, no one would find Miriam Dewberry eviscerated in a knacker's yard in Whitechapel. Abernathy pointed to an empty chair beside him. "Sit here, Raft." It was a bit unnerving to see Abernathy actually being civil for a change. Raft nodded and took a seat, reaching to loosen the buttons of his heavy overcoat. As a general rule, Raft despised winter and all its sloppy coldness, and resented having to wear quite so many layers of wool. "Lord Dewberry's daughter, Miriam, as I've said, vanished from a Knightsbridge tea dance. The girl was there 1 minute, and gone the next." It was now January 26. Raft wondered if there was truly any hope of finding the girl alive. Kidnap victims didn't tend to last very long, especially if the ransom wasn't forthcoming. "Despite an extensive search of major London districts, we've not been able to determine where the girl is being held." Endicott's gaze raked the room. "There have been no demands for ransom or otherwise." There was a collective indrawn breath. Raft imagined a great many fleshy wheels grinding away in a collective brain. It would, he reflected, at least account for the smell of the place. Chumley was the first to speak. "So they don't intend to give her back, is that it, sir?" Endicott looked momentarily annoyed. "We hope not. Chumley, sir." He was dreadfully young, not much more than 20, with dark hair and the sort of wide, long-lashed blue eyes that made young girls sigh and police inspectors grit their teeth in frustration. Raft thought Chumley was probably the kind of young copper who made all the girls swoon, and that was about it. In a tight spot, he'd be more of a hindrance than a boon, and God help the senior policeman who ended up saddled with such a ridiculously pretty hobby horse.